My battery is low and it's getting dark. Those were the last words sent from a world 140 million miles away. They didn't come from a stranded astronaut. They didn't come from a human being. They came from a robot, a machine made of aluminum, silicon, and gold. But when that message reached Earth, millions of people cried, "Why? Why did we mourn a pile of metal? Why did we treat a remote-controlled geologist like a lost friend?" Because he wasn't supposed to be there. According to the manual, he should have died 14 years ago. This is the story of the greatest survival epic in the history of space exploration. It is the story of two twin brothers, Spirit and Opportunity, who were sent on a suicide mission, a 3-month sprint before the Martian winter froze their hearts. NASA gave them 90 days to live. They gave us a decade of miracles. They climbed mountains they were never built to climb. They survived dust storms that blotted out the sun. They got stuck, they broke down, and they kept moving. They turned a cold, red graveyard into a familiar neighborhood. And to understand their life, we must first look at where they are now. There is a graveyard in the sky. It is not made of gray tombstones or manicured grass. It is a rusted, frozen world where the dust never settles. If you could stand there today, on the surface of Mars, in a place called Perseverance Valley, you would hear only the sound of the wind. It is a thin, high-pitched hiss, like a ghost slipping through a crack in a window. It is the sound of absolute, crushing solitude. But if you looked down through the swirling red haze, you would see something that does not belong. It is not a rock. It is not a crater. It is a machine. Its solar panels are coated in a thick blanket of dust, blending perfectly with the alien landscape. Its camera mast is frozen, looking forever toward the horizon. Its wheels are buried in the soil. It looks like a skeleton. It looks like a monument. This is Opportunity. We called him Oppy. And half a world away, in a crater named Gusev, lies his twin brother, Spirit. They are dead now. They are cold metal bodies resting on a dead planet. But once, they were the most alive things in the solar system. We tend to anthropomorphize machines. We give them names. We give them genders. We project our own hopes and fears onto circuits and wires. It is a strange human habit. But with Spirit and Opportunity, it felt different. They didn't just have names, they had personalities. Spirit was the troubled one, the fighter, the bad boy who landed in the wrong neighborhood and had to claw his way up mountains. Opportunity was the lucky one, the golden child who landed in a hole in one and lived a life of scientific luxury. They were built to last for 90 days, 3 months. That was the warrant. NASA engineers hoped, prayed, that they might survive a little longer, perhaps 4 months, before the brutal Martian winter froze their batteries or the dust choked their solar panels. 90 days. Opportunity lived for 14 years. This is not just a story about geology or engineering. It is a story about the stubbornness of life, even artificial life. It is a story about two metal geologist explorers who went to sleep every night under a billion stars, millions of miles from home, and woke up every morning to do the work that humanity could not yet do for itself. It is the story of the longest road trip in history, and it begins, as all Martian stories do, with a gamble. To understand why these two rovers were miracles, you have to understand the great galactic ghoul. That is what aerospace engineers call the curse of Mars. Before 2003, Mars was a graveyard of ambition. For decades, humanity had thrown metal at the red planet, and the planet had swatted it away like flies. The Soviets tried, the Americans tried, the Japanese tried. More than half of all missions to Mars ended in failure. They crashed. They missed the planet entirely. They blew up on the launch pad. Or, most terrifying of all, they landed, sent one single beep, and then fell silent forever. Mars does not want visitors. It is a planet of extremes. The average temperature is minus 80 degrees. The atmosphere is so thin it is almost a vacuum, yet it is thick enough to whip up dust storms that swallow the entire globe. Radiation rains down from the sky. The soil is toxic perchlorates. It is a hellscape wrapped in romantic red velvet. In the early 2000s, NASA was reeling. They had just lost two missions back to back. The Mars Climate Orbiter burned up because of a math error, confusion between metric and imperial units. The Mars Polar Lander simply vanished. The agency was humiliated. The public was losing interest. The budget was tight. They needed a win. They needed something bold. Enter Steve Squires, a geologist from Cornell University with a dream and a team of brilliant, exhausted engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. Their idea was crazy. They didn't want to send just one lander that would sit in one place and dig a hole. They wanted to send geologists. They wanted machines that could move, that could look at a rock, think that looks interesting, and drive over to hit it with a hammer. They decided to build twins, two identical rovers roughly the size of a golf cart, weighing about 400 pounds. They were solar-powered, looking like metallic insects with flat, dark wings spreading from their backs. They had 6 aluminum wheels, each with its own motor. They had a robotic arm, an instrument deployment device that acted like a human hand, holding microscopes and spectrometers. But their most defining feature was their face. At the top of a mast, 5 feet in the air, sat the PanCam. 2 camera lenses separated by the same distance as human eyes. This wasn't an accident. It was designed to give us, the humans back on Earth, a sense of depth, a sense of being there. When you looked into the eyes of spirit or opportunity, they looked back. They had a neck that could turn. They had a head that could nod. Even in the clean room at JPL, before they ever tasted rocket fuel, they felt alive. The construction phase was a race against celestial mechanics. Earth and Mars only align perfectly for a launch once every 26 months. If you miss that window, you wait 2 years. The team worked double shifts. They slept under their desks. Marriages were strained. Health was sacrificed. It was a pressure cooker of anxiety. They were building 2 of the most complex machines ever devised, and they had to fold them up into a tiny pyramid to fit inside a rocket. It was like trying to fold a Swiss Army knife into a paper airplane. Summer 2003. The Florida coast was humid and heavy. The Delta II rockets stood white and gleaming against the blue sky. Spirit launched first on June 10th. Opportunity followed on July 7th as the engines roared and the ground shook. Watching the fire pillars ascend into the clouds, the team at JPL felt a strange mix of relief and terror. Their children were leaving home. They were no longer metal and plastic sitting in a lab. They were now specks of light, hurtling through the vacuum at thousands of miles per hour. The cruise to Mars took 7 months. 7 months of silence, 7 months of checking telemetry, hoping a solar flare wouldn't fry the computers, hoping a micrometeoroid wouldn't puncture the heat shield. It is a lonely time for a spacecraft. They were asleep, wrapped in their aeroshells, spinning through the dark void. And then came January 2004. The arrival. This is the moment that keeps engineers awake at night. It is called EDL, Entry, Descent, and Landing, or, as it is more affectionately known, 6 minutes of terror. You have to understand the physics of landing on Mars. You are coming in at 12,000 miles per hour. You have to slow down to zero in 6 minutes. If you hit the atmosphere too steep, you burn up. If you hit it too shallow, you bounce off into deep space. Spirit was the first to arrive. January 3rd, 2004. The control room at JPL was packed. People were eating peanuts, a superstition that dated back to the Ranger missions of the 1960s. If you eat peanuts, the mission succeeds. The air was thick with tension. Altitude is 40 miles, velocity is 3 miles per second. The voice of the flight controller cut through the silence. Spirit hit the top of the Martian atmosphere. The heat shield, it reached temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The plasma trail behind the capsule blocked all radio signals. This was the blackout period. The rover was on its own. The computer on board had to make thousands of decisions in milliseconds. Parachute deploy. The capsule jerked violently. The supersonic parachute, an enormous canopy of fabric, snapped open. It had to withstand thousands of pounds of force. If it ripped, the mission was over. It held. But the atmosphere on Mars is too thin to land with just a... You are still falling at highway speeds. You need something else. The retro rockets fired. Then the most audacious part of the design, the airbags. Instead of landing on legs like the Vikings, or using a sky crane like the future Curiosity, Spirit, and Opportunity, were designed to bounce. A cocoon of massive, durable airbags inflated around the rover. It looked like a giant cluster of white grapes. The tether was cut. Spirit fell the last 40 feet in free fall. Impact. The signal on Earth simply said, "Impact detected." But on Mars, it was violence. The airbag ball hit the ground at 30 miles per hour. It bounced. It flew 50 feet into the air. It bounced again and again. It bounced nearly 30 times, tumbling across the rocky surface of Gusev crater. Inside that ball, Spirit was strapped in tight, blind and dizzy, waiting for the world to stop moving. Finally, the ball rolled to a stop. The airbags deflated, retracting slowly, revealing the lander petals. In the control room, the signal came back, a steady tone. "We're down. We're safe." The room erupted. Engineers were crying, hugging, jumping on tables. The champagne corks flew, but the real magic happened a few hours later. Spirit woke up. It opened its solar panels like a flower blooming in the desert. It raised its camera mast, and it took a picture. The first image came through line by line on the giant screens. First, just noise. Then, a horizon. Then, the distinct, rust-colored soil. Then, rocks. We were there. Spirit had landed in Gusev crater, a place that scientists believed was an ancient lake bed. They expected to see lake sediments. They expected to see evidence of water right there in front of the wheels. Instead, they saw basalt. Lava rock. It was a flat, barren, grey-red plain littered with sharp rocks. It was a desolate, dry wasteland. It was geologically boring. Spirit, the first twin, had landed in a parking lot. 3 weeks later, on January 25th, it was Opportunity's turn. If Spirit was the hard-working blue-collar worker who got the tough job, Opportunity was the one born under a lucky star. Oppy was aiming for the other side of the planet, a place called Meridiani Planum. Orbital data suggested there was hematite there, a mineral that often forms in water. The landing sequence repeated. The terror, the parachute, the airbags, the bounce. But when Opportunity stopped rolling and opened its eyes, the image that came back shocked the world. It wasn't a flat plain. It wasn't a field of lava rocks. It was bedrock. Opportunity had achieved an interplanetary hole-in-one. It had bounced and rolled right into a small, shallow crater, later named Eagle Crater, and stopped facing a wall of exposed, layered rock. It was the holy grail for a geologist. The book of Mars history was open, right there, 20 feet away. "I can't believe it," Steve Squires whispered. "We're inside a crater." The contrast between the two landing sites set the tone for their entire lives. Spirit had to fight for every discovery. He had to drive for months just to find something interesting. Opportunity literally landed on the Discovery, but before they could move, they had to survive the Sol, a Martian day which is about 39 minutes longer than an Earth day. They were 100 million miles from the nearest mechanic. The first challenge was just getting off the lander. The rovers were folded up on they had to cut cables, deploy wheels, and stand up. It took days. It was a slow, deliberate yoga performed by robots. Finally, the command was sent. Drive. Opportunity's 6 wheels turned. The metal crunched against the Martian soil. It left tracks. The first tracks. There is something profoundly lonely about those tracks. 2 parallel lines of tread marks stamped into dust that hasn't moved for 3 billion years. It is a signature. We were here. The 90-day clock began ticking. Every day was a gift. Every day the sun rose, a shrunken, fierce dot in a butterscotch sky, and hit the solar panels. The electrons flowed, the batteries charged, the heaters turned on to keep the electronics from shattering in the cold. The rovers began to explore. Opportunity drove up to the bedrock in Eagle Crater. It put its microscope on the rock, and it saw something that looked like blueberries. Tiny, hard, grey spheres scattered in the rock. "What are those?" the scientists asked. They were hematite concretions. They were formed by water, not just a little water, standing water. Acidic, salty water that had soaked these rocks for thousands of years. Within 2 months, Opportunity had proven what humanity had speculated about for centuries. Mars was once wet. Mars was once habitable. Mission accomplished. Everything else was gravy. But on the other side of the planet, Spirit was struggling. The Gusev crater floor was a bust. No water evidence, just volcanic rock. The team made a risky decision. They looked at the horizon. There were hills there, the Columbia Hills. "It's too far," some said. "We'll never make it before the 90 days are up." "We have to try," the others argued. "There's nothing here." So Spirit began to drive. It was a race against the calendar. The winter was coming. The sun was getting lower in the sky. The dust was accumulating on the solar panels, blocking the light. This was the death sentence everyone expected. The dust factor. Mars is dusty. The electrostatic dust clings to everything. The engineers predicted that after 90 days, the panels would be so covered in dust that the rovers wouldn't be able to generate enough power to wake up. They would go into a low-power fault mode and eventually freeze to death. By Sol 80, the power levels were dropping, the end was near. The scientists began to prioritize their final targets. They were writing the eulogies. And then, the first miracle happened. It happened to Spirit first. One night, the rover went to sleep with 60% power capacity due to dust. The next morning, it woke up with 90%. The engineers stared at the data. It didn't make sense. Had the sensors failed? They looked at the images from the deck cam. The solar panels, which had been coated in a layer of reddish-brown filth, were suddenly black and shiny. They looked brand new. A wind gust. A dust devil. During the night, a vortex of wind had passed over the rover and vacuumed the panels clean. Mars, the planet that was trying to kill them, had just saved them. The cleaning events became the stuff of legend. Just when the rovers were on the brink of death, the wind would come. It was as if the planet wanted to be explored. It was as if the great galactic ghoul had decided to show mercy. The 90-day warranty expired. The rovers kept driving. Sol 100, Sol 200, Sol 365. A full Earth year on Mars. They were no longer just machines on a mission. They were inhabitants. They were the first permanent residents of a new Spirit reached the Columbia Hills. He climbed. He strained his motors on the steep slopes. He found rocks that had been altered by water. He found his own glory, hard-won and gritty. Opportunity climbed out of Eagle Crater and drove across the vast sandy plains of Meridiani. It was like driving across a frozen ocean. Flat, featureless, dangerous. The sand dunes were traps. If you drove into one, you might never get out. They became an extension of us. When Spirit's wheel jammed, the engineers limped. When opportunity got stuck in the sand, the scientists held their breath. We watched their metal fade, we watched their cables fray. But they didn't stop. They were fueled by the sun and driven by human curiosity. They were the pioneers of the Rust world, and the golden age of exploration had begun. No one knew it then, but the 90-day mission was just the prologue. The real story, the struggle, the tragedy, and the glory was yet to come. Because Mars is beautiful, yes, but Mars is also patient, and Mars creates traps that wait for 1 billion years, just for a passing wheel. They say that time moves differently on Mars. It is not just the physics of it, the fact that a day is 39 minutes longer than a day on Earth. It is the weight of the silence. On Earth, time is marked by noise, by traffic, by voices, by the rustle of leaves. On Mars, time is marked only by the accumulation of dust. It settles on the camera lenses. It settles on the golden decks of the machines, counting the seconds like an hourglass that never runs out of sand. After the 90-day warranty expired, Spirit and Opportunity entered a new phase of existence. NASA called it the extended mission. The engineers called it bonus time. Every sunrise was a victory that defied the odds. Every meter driven was a theft from the jaws of fate. Back on Earth, the humans who controlled them had changed. They had stopped living on Earth time. To operate a rover efficiently, you have to wake up when the rover wakes up. You have to sleep when the rover sleeps. And because the Martian day drifts relative to Earth, the scientists were living in a constant state of jet lag. They taped black heavy curtains over their windows to block out the California sun. They wore watches calibrated to Martian seconds. They became creatures of two worlds. Their bodies in Pasadena, but their minds walking the red sands of Gusev and Meridiani. The rovers were no longer just experiments. They had become colleagues. They had become family. And like any family member, you stop worrying about their birth and you start worrying about their health. Spirit and Opportunity were teenagers now. They were bold, they were confident, and they were beginning to show the first signs of arthritis. The Martian environment is brutal on machinery. The temperature swings from freezing to boiling every single day. Metal expands and contracts, expands and contracts. Solder joints crack, lubricants evaporate, but the twins kept moving. Opportunity, the lucky one, was busy becoming a celebrity. On Sol 952, almost 3 years into its 3-month mission, Opportunity arrived at the rim of Victoria Crater. If Eagle Crater was a golf hole, Victoria was a stadium. It was half a gaping maw in the planet's crust, with jagged cliffs dropping hundreds of feet down to a dune-filled floor. Oppy stood on the edge, looking down. The view was terrifying and magnificent. The layers of rock in the cliffs read like pages in a history book. stretching back billions of years. The drivers on Earth were nervous. The slopes were steep. If Oppy slipped, it would be a long tumble to the bottom. There would be no recovery. But science demands risk. No guts, no glory became the unspoken motto. Opportunity spent 2 years exploring this crater. It drove dangerously close to the promontories, cliffs with names like Cape Verde and Cabo Frio. It took panoramic photos that, when stitched together, looked like the grandest canyons of the American West, but painted in hues of rust, ochre, and violet. While Opportunity was enjoying the scenic route, Spirit was fighting a war. Spirit was the blue-collar rover. He had landed in the rough part of town. The rocks in Gusev crater were sharp, treacherous, and relentless. Spirit had a goal: the Columbia Hills, a range of peaks in the distance that looked impossibly far away when he first landed. It took him months of grinding, slow driving to reach the base, and then he began to climb. Driving a rover uphill is a nightmare. The wheels slip you command the rover to drive 10 meters, but the wheels just spin, and he only moves 2 meters. It is a dance of frustration. But Spirit was stubborn. On Sol 481, he reached the summit of Husband Hill. It was a moment of pure triumph. The rover stood at the highest point for miles around. He looked back at where he had come from. He could see his landing site, a tiny speck in the vast plains below. He had conquered the mountain. From that peak, Spirit captured movies of dust devils, towering tornadoes of red dust spinning across the crater floor. They looked like ghosts dancing in the heat shimmer. It was the peak of his life, but the descent would be the beginning of the end. In 2006, tragedy struck Spirit. His right front wheel stopped turning. The motor had burned out. The lubricant had failed. The wheel was dead. For a car on Earth, a flat tire is an inconvenience. For a 6-wheeled robot on Mars, it is a disability. The engineers tried everything to fix it. They sent commands to jiggle it, to warm it up, to push it. Nothing worked. The wheel was frozen solid. Spirit was now a 5-wheeled. He could no longer drive normally. If he tried to drive forward, the dead wheel dug into the ground like an anchor, stopping him dead. So the drivers had to teach him a new way to walk. They turned him around. Spirit began to drive backwards. He dragged the broken wheel behind him like a paralyzed leg. It was a painful sight. The once proud mountaineer was now limping, dragging his dead limb through the dust, leaving a deep trench behind him wherever he went. But in a twist of irony that only the universe could script, this disability led to Spirit's greatest discovery. One day, while dragging his broken wheel through an area known as home plate, the trench he dug revealed something bright white beneath the red dust. The scientists looked closer. They fired the spectrometer. It was pure silica. On Earth, you find silica like this in only 2 places: near hot springs or near volcanoes. It was the smoking gun. It proved that this place, this exact spot where Spirit was limping, was once a hot, steaming, bubbling hydrothermal vent. It was exactly the kind of environment where life could have started billions of years ago. Spirit had found the best evidence for life on Mars, not because of his sophisticated senses, but because he broke his leg and had to drag it. He was broken, but he was still useful. He was still an explorer. But Mars is cruel to the old and the infirm. It was 2009. Sol 1892. 5 years into the mission. Spirit was driving backwards, as usual, across a flat, deceptive patch of ground near an area called Troy. The ground looked solid. It looked like a hard crust. But it was a lie. Underneath the thin crust was a pit of loose, powdery sand. It was a camouflage trap. Spirit's wheels broke through the crust. He sank. The drivers on Earth realized the danger immediately. Stop, they commanded. Assess. But the physics were against them. The more Spirit tried to move, the deeper he sank. The loose powder offered no traction. It was like trying to drive a car out of a ball pit filled with flour. And the broken wheel, the anchor, was now buried deep in the sand, hooking him in place. Spirit was stuck. Thus began the Free Spirit campaign. Back on Earth, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the engineers built a sandbox. They filled it with a special powder designed to mimic the soil at Troy. They brought in a test rover, a stunt double, and they recreated the trap. For months, they tried every maneuver imaginable. They tried crabbing sideways. They tried swimming with the wheels. They tried rocking back and forth. Every day they sent a new set of commands to. Every day the photos came back showing the same thing. Spirit was still there. The belly of the rover was now resting on a rock. His wheels were spinning in the air. He was high-centered. He wasn't just stuck. He was beached. The mood in the control room shifted from determination to despair. They knew what was coming. Winter. Mars has seasons, just like Earth, but Martian winter is twice as long and infinitely colder. For a solar-powered rover, winter is a fight for survival. To survive, the rovers have to tilt their solar panels toward the sun, angling themselves on a hill to catch the weak winter rays. But Spirit was flat. He was stuck in a sand trap, unable to tilt. As the days grew shorter, the sun dipped lower in the sky. The energy levels began to plummet. The engineers started shutting down systems. First, they turned off the science instruments. No more geology. Then they turned off the driving motors. No more escape. Then they turned off the communication relays. They were stripping him down to his bare essence, a battery and a heater. Just stay warm, they whispered to the screens. Just survive the night. Sol 2210, March 22nd, 2010. The telemetry on the screen was weak. Spirit's internal temperature was dropping. The heaters were failing. The batteries didn't have enough juice to keep the electronics warm. A low-power fault was triggered. Spirit shut down everything. He went into a deep hibernation mode, a coma from which he was supposed to wake when the sun returned. The last message was a simple packet of data, a final heartbeat. Then, silence. The team waited. Spring arrived on Mars. The sun got higher. The light hit the panels again. Spirit, this is Earth. Do you copy? Silence. Spirit, if you can hear us, send a beep. Silence. The deep space network, the giant ears of humanity listening to the cosmos, swept the frequencies. They listened for a whisper. They listened for a ghost. For more than a year, they sent commands. They played songs in the control room to boost morale. They refused to give up. But the cold had done its work. Sometime during that long, dark winter, without enough power to run the survival heaters, the solder joints on the main computer board had likely cracked. The brain of the rover had frozen to death. Spirit was gone. On May the 25th, 2011, NASA officially declared the mission over. There was a memorial service at JPL. There were no bodies to bury. There was just a spot on a map millions of miles away where a brave little robot sat motionless in a sand trap, slowly being covered by the red dust he had spent his life studying. He died as he lived, fighting against the odds, stuck in the mud, but looking at the sky. He was the first of the twins to fall. But the story wasn't over. On the other side of the planet, opportunity was still alive. When the news of Spirit's death reached the team, they looked at Oppy with a new sense of fear. They were twins. They were built from the same blueprints, the same batch of aluminum, the same wires. If spirit could die, opportunity could die. Oppy was now an only child, a solitary traveler on a desolate world, and Oppy had just finished exploring Victoria Crater. He was getting back on the road. The scientists decided to do something audacious. They looked at the map. There was another crater, a monster. It was called Endeavour. It was 12 miles away. For a rover that moved at the speed of a tortoise, 12 miles was an eternity. It was a marathon. It would take years to get there. But Oppy was healthy. His wheels were good. His panels were relatively clean. Let's go, they said. And so began the long march. Opportunity turned his back on his brother's grave and drove south. He drove through the empty quarter, miles and miles of flat, featureless nothingness. It was the loneliest time of the mission. For weeks, the scenery didn't change, just red dirt, red sky, and the tracks stretching out behind him. He was a tiny speck of gold moving across an infinite canvas of rust. He was aging too. His robotic arm had a frozen shoulder, a joint that wouldn't move properly. His flash memory began to suffer from amnesia. Sometimes he would refuse to save the data he collected during the day, forgetting it all when he slept at night. The engineers had to hack his brain, teaching him to use his RAM differently, treating him like an elderly patient with dementia. But he kept moving. Year 8, Year 9, Year 10. He broke the record for the longest distance driven on another world, surpassing the Soviet Lunokhod moon rover. He completed a marathon, 26.2 miles. He arrived at the rim of Endeavour Crater in 2011. It was a new world. Baroxia were older than anything he had seen before. They were clays. They were formed in neutral, drinkable water. If Spirit had found the acid hot springs, Opportunity had found the freshwater lake. He was a machine, but he felt unstoppable. He had defied the warranty by a decade. He had survived the death of his brother. He had survived the freezing winter. He had survived the computer glitches. He seemed immortal. We began to believe that he would simply drive forever, that he would be there when the first humans landed, waiting to greet them like a loyal dog waiting on the porch. Good boy, Oppy, you made it. But Mars is not a static place. Mars has moods. Mars has a temper. And in the summer of 2018, the planet began to stir. It started as a small cloud of dust near the Acidalia planitia, a local storm. Nothing to worry about. But the heat from the storm lofted more dust into the dust absorbed the sunlight, heating the atmosphere further, which created more wind, which lifted more dust. It was a runaway feedback loop. Within weeks, the small cloud had grown. It merged with other storms. It wrapped around the equator. It became a global dust event, a planet-encircling monster. From Earth, looking through telescopes, the features of Mars disappeared. The planet turned into a featureless, fuzzy orange ball. Down on the surface, at the rim of Endeavour Crater, the sky began to darken. Opportunity looked up. The sun, usually a crisp star, began to fade. It turned into a dull, smudged coin. Then it became a faint glow. Then it vanished. The solar panels need light. Without light, there is no power. Without power, there is no heat. Without heat, the battery freezes. The opacity of the atmosphere, measured in tau, skyrocketed. A normal sunny day on Mars has a tau of 0.5. When the storm hit, the tau climbed to 10.8. It was night in the middle of the day. It was a perpetual, choking twilight. The energy levels. NASA commanded Opportunity to stop everything. Stop science. Stop driving. Stop talking. Conserve power, they begged. Just sleep. But the storm didn't lift. Day after day, the darkness held. The dust was so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The rover was bathed in a ghostly dark red gloom. On Sol 5111, June 10, 2018, Opportunity woke up for a brief moment to send a status report. The telemetry was heartbreaking. Energy production, 22 watt-hours. A normal day was 700. Internal temperature, minus 29 degrees Celsius. The battery was critically low. The sky was critically dark. The engineers translated the data into a sentence that would break the world's heart. It wasn't a direct quote, but it was the poetic truth of the data packet. My battery is low, and it's getting dark. Opportunity transmitted the message. The dish turned slightly, and then the voltage dropped below the threshold. The mission clock stopped. The hum of the electronics faded. Opportunity went to sleep. Outside, the wind howled, burying the rover in a tomb of dust. He was all alone in the dark, and on Earth, we waited. We waited for the storm to clear. We waited for the phone to ring. We didn't know it yet, but the long conversation was over. There is a specific kind of silence that exists only in space operations. It is not the silence of a library or an empty church. It is a silence that screams. It is a silence composed of static, of background radiation left over from the Big Bang, and of the absence of a specific digital handshake that you have waited 14 years to hear. When Opportunity fell silent on June 10, 2018, the silence didn't happen all at once. It began with a chaotic crescendo of noise. The global dust storm that swallowed Mars was a monster of physics. It wasn't just wind, it was a wall of particulate matter. The dust on Mars is as fine as cigarette smoke, yet it is sharp, jagged, and electrostatically charged. When the storm reached its peak, it didn't just darken the sky, it effectively turned the day into a deep, impenetrable midnight. In the Perseverance Valley, where Opportunity sat perched on a slope, the tau, the measure of atmospheric opacity, reached 10.8. To put that in perspective, a tau of 1.0 is a hazy afternoon in Los Angeles. A tau of 5.0 is a thick fog where you cannot see your feet. A tau of 10.8 is the inside of a tomb. The sun, which had been Oppy's lifeline, his food, his heartbeat for 5,111 souls, was completely erased from the sky. The rover was designed to handle shadows. It was designed to handle clouds. It was not designed for an eclipse that lasted for months. The last telemetry packet showed the solar arrays were generating 22 watt-hours of energy. A standard light bulb in your house uses 60 watts in 1 hour. Opportunity, a machine of immense complexity, was trying to survive on 1/3 of the energy required to light a closet. The onboard computer, the rover electronics module, made the only logical choice it could. It committed suicide to save its life. It triggered a low-power fault. This is a survival reflex. It cuts power to everything. The cameras go blind, the arm freezes, the scientific instruments shut down. The radio transmitter, even the volatile memory, the rover's short-term thoughts, is wiped clean. The only things left running are the master clock and the survival heaters. A clock keeps ticking, counting the seconds, waiting for the sun to return. The heaters sip the last drops of battery acid to keep the batteries from freezing solid. Opportunity curled into a fetal position, electronically speaking, and went to sleep. Back on Earth, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, entered a state of suspended animation. The tactical uplink meetings, usually buzzing with plans for driving and drilling, were cancelled. There was nothing to upload. There was no one to listen. Instead, a new routine emerged: the listening vigil. The Deep Space Network, or DSN, is humanity's greatest ear. It consists of massive parabolic dishes, some as wide as a football field, stationed in the Mojave Desert, in the hills of Madrid, Spain, and in the eucalyptus forests of Canberra, Australia. These 3 stations ensure that as the Earth rotates, we are never deaf to the cosmos. Every day, the DSN operators would point these dishes at the coordinates of Mars. They would tune the receivers to the X-band frequency, opportunity-specific dialect, and they would watch the spectrum analyzer. This screen shows the radio noise of the universe. It looks like a jagged green line of grass, dancing at the bottom of a graph. If a spacecraft calls home, you see a spike, a tall, thin tower of green shooting up from the grass. That spike carries data. It carries health reports. It carries photos. For weeks, the line remained flat. Just the grass, just the noise of dead stars. The engineers tried to remain optimistic. They traded stories about the cleaning events of the past. Remember Sol 1000 to say, remember when he was down to 30% power and the wind saved him? He's a survivor. He's tough. They anthropomorphized him not because they were sentimental, but because it was a coping mechanism. If Oppy was a person, he had grit. He had a will to live. If he was just a machine, he was subject to thermodynamics, and the math was getting grim. July bled into August. The storm on Mars began to... The heat that had lifted the dust into the atmosphere began to dissipate. Gravity began to reclaim the particles. The sky turned from black to dark brown, then to a rusty... Sunlight was touching the surface again. By September, the models showed that the solar isolation, the amount of light hitting the panels, should be sufficient to wake the rover up. Even if the panels were covered in a layer of dust, the direct sun should have triggered the solar array wake-up mode. But September came and went, and the silence deepened. This is when the fear set in. The fear of the mission clock fault. This is the nightmare scenario. It works like this. The rover has a battery. The battery powers a clock. The clock tells the rover when the sun is up. If the battery drains to absolute zero, not just low, but dead, the clock stops. When the sun finally hits the panels and charges the battery enough to boot the computer, the rover wakes up, but his memory is gone. He doesn't know what time it is. He doesn't know what day it is. The rover's default setting upon a hard reboot is to assume it is Sol 1, but the clock starts at 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds, midnight. So, imagine the tragedy. Opportunity wakes up, the sun is shining, but his internal brain thinks it is midnight. His programming says, "It is dark. Why am I awake? I must be malfunctioning. I should go back to sleep to save power." So he shuts down. A few hours later, the sun is higher. He wakes up again. He checks the clock. It says 1 hour, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. Still night, he shuts down. He is trapped in a loop. A zombie rover, awake during the day but convinced it is night, refusing to talk to Earth because he thinks he needs to sleep. To break this loop, the team devised the sweep and beep strategy. They stopped just listening. They started shouting. They used the 70-meter dish at Goldstone to blast commands at Mars. They sent a specific sequence. Wake up, ignore the clock. Turn on the transmitter, call home. They sent this command at different times of the Martian day, trying to catch him in that brief moment when he might be awake and confused. Opportunity, this is Earth. Acknowledge. Opportunity, reset clock. Opportunity, report status. They sent these commands into the void, knowing that it takes roughly 14 minutes for the radio waves to cross the gulf between the planets, and then another 14 minutes for a reply. Every command session was a half-hour exercise in holding your breath. Sending, traveling, waiting, listening, nothing. The culture at JPL changed during these months. The control room, usually a place of sterile focus, became a shrine. People started bringing in lucky peanuts by the jar full. They brought in photos of the rover, and they brought in music. It started as a small morale booster, but it became a global phenomenon. Each day, the flight director would choose a song to play over the mission control loops before sending the commands. It was a serenade to a lost friend. They played Wake Me Up Before You Go Go by Wham, a desperate upbeat plea. They played Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, a hope for the dust to clear. They played Keep Yourself Alive by Queen. They played Rocket Man by Elton John. They even played heavy metal, Enter Sandman, hoping the noise would somehow shake the dust off the panels. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was humans trying to bridge the gap of 140 million miles with art and melody. The public joined in. The hashtag #WakeUpOppy trended on Twitter. Thousands of digital postcards were sent to NASA. One postcard from a retired mechanic in Ohio read, "I fixed transmissions for 40 years. If I could get up there with a wrench, I'd get him running. Don't give up." Another, from a class of kindergartners, featured a drawing of the rover holding a balloon. "Get well soon, Oppy." But while the humans were singing, the physics of Mars was turning hostile. The season was shifting. In the southern hemisphere, where opportunity sat, autumn was fading. The winter solstice was approaching. This was the deadline. The hard stop. Martian winter is a killer. The sun drops low on the horizon. The days become short. The temperatures plummet to -100 degrees Celsius, 148 Fahrenheit at night. The rovers were designed with review of environmental test results data that said their electronics could survive down to -55 degrees, maybe -65. At -100, physics changes. The electrolyte in the lithium-ion batteries turns into a gel, then freezes. When it freezes, it expands. It can crack the battery case, the solder joints, the tiny metal connections that hold the microchips to the motherboards are made of different metals than the boards themselves. As the temperature drops, the board shrinks at one rate, and the solder shrinks at another. This thermal contraction creates stress. Snap. A microscopic crack in a solder joint, a broken pathway, a lobotomy. Spirit had died this way. The cold had snapped his brain. Now, the same cold was wrapping its fingers around opportunity. The engineers knew they were racing the calendar. They needed to wake him up before the deep freeze set in. They needed him to turn on his internal heaters. If he was awake, he could direct electricity to the heaters and stay warm. If he was asleep, he was at the mercy of the environment. November 2018 passed. No signal. December 2018 passed. The winter solstice arrived. The temperatures at Perseverance Valley bottomed out. The engineers looked at the thermal models. They looked at the graphs. The survivability line had been crossed. Historically, Oppy had survived cold winters before, but he had always been awake. He had always been active, generating heat from his own electronics. A running computer is a warm computer. A dead computer is a block of ice. Hope began to curdle into grief. The songs in the control room became sadder. The sound of silence. Dust in the wind. January 2019 marked the 15th anniversary of the landing. It should have been a party. There should have been cake. There should have been a drive to a new crater. Instead, it was a memorial. The team realized that the battle was likely over. The strategy for recovery shifted to strategy for closure. They couldn't listen forever. The Deep Space Network is a shared resource. The Voyager probes, the Curiosity rover, the Juno mission at Jupiter, they all needed antenna time. NASA couldn't justify dedicating the world's most powerful ears to a ghost forever. A decision was made. They would try for a few more weeks, hoping for a Hail Mary, a random event where the wind might clean the panels and the battery might thaw. But if nothing happened by February, they would pull the plug. February 12th, 2019. The last night. The weather in Pasadena matched the mood. A winter storm was battering Southern California. Rain lashed against the concrete buildings of JPL. The wind howled through the arroyo. Inside the Space Flight Operations Facility, Building 230, the dark room was crowded. This room is the cathedral of robotic exploration. The walls are lined with screens showing the telemetry of every NASA mission in the solar system. In the center is the Lucky Peanuts jar. Tonight, the jar was open, but few were eating. Past mission managers, engineers who had moved on to other jobs, scientists who had retired, they all came back. They stood along the back walls. They sat on the floor. Steve Squires, the principal investigator, the man who had dreamed of these rovers since 1987, stood near the flight director's console. He looked tired. He looked like a father waiting for news about a missing child. Tanya Harrison, the flight director for the night, sat at the controls. She had the final sequence queued up. It was a powerful set of commands. It was designed to bypass the clock, bypass the fault protection, and force the UHF antenna to broadcast a tone. It was the digital equivalent of a defibrillator paddle. "We are ready." Her voice was steady, professional, but beneath the headset, the tension was electric. Sending final command sequence. She pressed the key. The data packet was routed to Goldstone, deep in the Mojave Desert. The massive 70-meter dish, glowing white in the darkness, blasted the signal toward the red star in the sky. 20 kilowatts of power, a scream across the void. And then, the wait. The light time delay was roughly 14 minutes one way. The signal traveled past the moon, past the orbit of ancient satellites, past the empty blackness. It reached Mars. It washed over the planet. It hit the silent valley. If Opportunity was alive, if his receiver was still working, if his battery had even 1 volt of charge, he would hear it, and he would answer. The clock in the control room counted up. Time to target. 0 o'clock. Signal received on Mars. Now, the return trip. 14 minutes to get back. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans for the server racks. The engineers stared at the spectrum analyzer. They were praying for a spike, a glitch, anything that wasn't flat. 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 14 minutes. This was the moment. The signal should be here. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. The Deep Space Network manager, monitoring the carrier wave, spoke into the loop. No signal lock. No carrier detected. The line remained flat, just the green grass of the cosmic background noise. 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It was over. The window had closed. Mars had rotated the rover out of view of the Earth. Opportunity had not answered. He was gone. Tanya Harrison slowly removed her headset. She looked at the team. There were tears streaming down faces that had stared at Mars for a decade. There were hands covering mouths. Steve Squires nodded slowly. It was a nod of acceptance. "That's it," someone whispered. There was no breakdown, no wailing. It was a professional, quiet grief. They didn't just lose it, they lost the connection. For 15 years, Opportunity had been their eyes. He had been their hands. When he drove, they felt the crunch of the wind. When he looked at a sunset, they saw the blue halo around the sun. Now, they were blind. They were back on Earth, trapped in their own bodies, no longer walking on another world. The link was severed. The next morning, February 13th, 2019, the official funeral was held. It was a press conference broadcast to the world. Thomas Serbekan, the Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate, stood at the podium. He is a man who usually speaks in data points and budget lines, but today his voice was thick with emotion. He recounted the mission, the 90 days that became 5,000, the 45, the water discovered. He looked at the camera. He looked at the team sitting in the front row. I am standing here with a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude, he said, pausing to collect himself. To declare the Opportunity mission as complete. Complete. It is the most final word in the language of space. It means the books are closed, the telemetry stream is terminated, the budget line is zeroed out. But the emotional fallout was instantaneous. When the news broke, the internet wept. The phrase, "my battery is low and it's getting dark," was shared millions of times. It wasn't a literal quote. It was a poetic interpretation of the final data packet, but it captured the essence of the moment perfectly. It resonated with everyone who had ever felt tired or lost or far from home. We mourned him because he was innocent. He was a curious little explorer who never hurt anyone, who only wanted to see what was over the next hill, and who died doing exactly what he was built to do. He died at his post. But in the silence that followed, a new realization began to dawn. Opportunity was dead, yes, but he was not lost. He is still there, right now as you listen to this. He is parked in Perseverance Valley. He is tilted slightly to the west, as if leaning into the wind. The dust is burying him. Year by year, the red powder accumulates on his deck. It fills the spaces between his wheels. It covers the gold calibration target. Eventually, he will become a fossil. In a million years, when the geology of Mars shifts, he might be encased in sedimentary rock, a layer of aluminum and silicon trapped between layers of sandstone. Future geologists, perhaps human, perhaps something else, might dig him up. They will find his wheels. They will find his camera. They will find the American flag printed on his arm, and they will know that once in the ancient past, a species from the blue planet next door reached out across the dark. They will know that we were curious. They will know that we were explorers. But is that the end of the story? Just a rusted skeleton in the dirt? No, because the story of spirit and opportunity it's about the data, and it's about the legacy they left behind. A legacy that is currently driving nuclear-powered and laser-armed across the Jezero crater. The twins are dead, but their children are alive. And in the final chapter of our journey, we will see how the death of one generation breathed life into the next. We will see what happens when humans finally go to visit the graves of the robots who paved the way. When a great explorer dies, the map they drew remains. Opportunity and spirit are gone. Their electronic voices have been silenced. Their heaters have grown cold. The physical reality of their bodies is now static. They are metal statues slowly equalizing with the ambient temperature of the Martian atmosphere. But the stillness in Gusev Crater and Perseverance Valley is misleading. Because while the parents are sleeping, the children are wide awake. The legacy of the twin rovers did not end with a mission complete command. It transferred, it uploaded, it evolved. Even before Opportunity breathed his last, a new generation had arrived. In 2012, a monster descended from the sky. Its name was Curiosity. If Spirit and Opportunity were golf carts, Curiosity was a tank. It was the size of a Mini Cooper. It weighed a ton. It didn't bounce on airbags. It was lowered gently by a rocket-powered sky crane, a maneuver so insane that engineers called it the ultimate gamble. Curiosity didn't rely on the fickle sun. It carried a nuclear heart, an RTG, radioisotope thermoelectric generator, filled with decaying plutonium. It could drive at night. It could drive in winter. It could ignore the dust. But Curiosity, and later his twin Perseverance, who landed in 2021, only exist because of the twins. Every time Perseverance navigates a rock field autonomously, it is using algorithms refined by Spirit's struggles in the Columbia Hills. Every time Curiosity drills into a rock, it is looking for the chemical signatures that Opportunity first sniffed out in Eagle Crater. The DNA of the twins is written into the code of every machine that follows. And there is a physical tribute too. Attached to the chassis of the Perseverance rover, the most advanced machine we have ever built, is a small, simple calibration target. And etched onto that target is a silhouette. It is a drawing of they are riding along, they are ghosts in the machine, watching over the new generation, guiding them through the dust. But let us zoom out. Let us look at the bigger picture. What did we actually buy with those 14 years? What was the return on investment for the 90-day warranty? We bought a planet. Before 2004, Mars was a blurry abstraction. It was a reddish dot in a telescope. It was a grainy black and white photo from the Viking landers. It was a place of myths and monsters. Spirit and Opportunity turned Mars into a place. They gave it neighborhoods. Home Plate, Husband Hill, Santa Maria Crater, Marathon Valley. These are no longer just coordinates. They are landmarks. We know the texture of the rocks there. We know how the sunset looks from the rim of Endeavour. We know how the shadows lengthen in the winter. They made Mars familiar. They took a terrifying alien world and turned it into a backyard. Because of them, we know that Mars was not always dead. We know it had lakes. We know it had hot springs. We know it had fresh, neutral water. They proved that two neighboring planets, Earth and Mars, started as siblings. One lived and one died. And in doing so, they showed us how fragile our own blue marble truly is. But the deepest legacy isn't scientific. It's emotional. It is the lesson of resilience. It is the story of the broken wheel that dragged itself up a mountain. It is the story of the robotic arm that couldn't move its shoulder, yet still did the work. It is the story of the memory card that kept forgetting, yet woke up every morning to learn again. These machines were imperfect. They were flawed. They broke. They aged. And that is why we loved them. Because they were like us. We projected our own humanity onto them, and in return, they showed us the best version of ourselves. They showed us that we are a species that does not give up, that we are a species that will build a boat to cross a dark ocean, even if we know we can never come back. Now, let us cast our minds forward. Let us leave the present day and travel into the future. Let us go to the year 2060, or perhaps 28. The silence of Mars has finally been broken, not by the whir of servos, but by the sound of breathing. Humans have arrived. There are domes in the Valles Marineris. There are greenhouses in the first generation of Martians. Children born on the red soil are learning to walk in 1/3 gravity. Exploration has become tourism. The dangerous frontier has become a history lesson. Imagine a pressurized rover, a massive six-wheeled buggy driven by a human pilot, bouncing across the plains of Meridiani Planum. Inside, there are two astronauts. Their suits are dusty, their faces are tired but excited. They are on a pilgrimage. They are following a map that was drawn half a century ago. Coordinates match, the pilot says. We should be close. They slow down. The terrain is familiar. It matches the old panoramic photos in the archives. There, the co-pilot points. At the edge of the valley, do you see it? It is just a mound, a hump in the red dirt. It looks like a rock that has been swallowed by the dunes. They stop the rover. They cycle the airlock. They step out onto the surface. The wind is blowing that same high-pitched hiss that Oppy listened to for 14 years. They walk slowly toward the mound. Their boots leave heavy prints in the sand, right next to the faint fossilized tracks of aluminum wheels. They kneel down. The astronaut reaches out a gloved hand. With a soft brush, she begins to sweep away the dust. Decades of accumulation. The red powder drifts away in the wind. First, a glint of gold, the thermal blankets. Then the dull grey of the solar panels. Then the camera mast. It is opportunity. He is exactly where he fell asleep. He is frozen in time. The astronaut wipes the dust from the PanCam lenses. The glass is scratched and pitted by micrometeoroids, but the eyes are still there. The eyes that saw more of this world than any living being. This is not a salvage mission. They are not here to bring him back to Earth. You do not move a monument. You do not dig up a pharaoh. Instead, they place a small plaque in the ground next to the rover. It is made of titanium. It will last for 10,000 years. It reads, Opportunity Mer landed. January 2004, rested. June 2018, for the love of discovery, the first of us to walk this path. The astronauts stand in silence for a moment. They touch their helmets to the cold metal of the rover's deck, a gesture of respect. A thank you. Good night, Oppy, the pilot whispers. They turn around and walk back to... They leave him there, not as a piece of trash, but as a sentinel. He will remain there as the cities of Mars grow around him. Perhaps one day he will be under a glass dome, the centerpiece of a park where children play. Perhaps they will look at him and ask, is that the robot that lived forever? And their parents will say, yes, that's the one. Because in a way, he is still alive. Physics tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. The chemical energy in Oppy's battery is gone. But the energy of his mission, the inspiration, the knowledge, the wonder, has transformed. It flows through the fiber optic cables of the internet. It exists in the textbooks of geology. It lives in the spark of curiosity in a child's eye who looks up at the red star and wonders, can I go there? There is a concept in Japanese culture called tsukumogami, the idea that tools, after serving their masters faithfully for many years, acquire a soul. If any machine in history has earned a soul, it is opportunity. And souls do not die. They simply change frequency. So tonight, if you look up at the night sky, find Mars. It is that bright, unblinking red dot. It looks cold. It looks distant, but it is not empty. There is a friend up there. He is sleeping in the Valley of Perseverance. The wind is singing him a lullaby. The dust is tucking him in. He is waiting for us to come back. And until we do, he holds the watch. His battery is low. It is dark, but he is not afraid, because he knows he did good. And the silence isn't loneliness anymore. It is peace. Sleep well, opportunity. Your journey is done. But ours is just beginning.